My friends and I would often go to a small lake that was surrounded by a hiking trail with paved parking, barbecue areas, etc. On the opposite side of the lake and accessible by the trail, there was a popular swimming hall with one spot in particular that offered a cliff probably 10 ft above the water that offered a fun plunge. One Saturday, my friends were out of town, but I was very close to my youth pastor and his girlfriend, whom I'll call Kay. She was probably 20 at the time and was a great mentor to us teenagers, so I really enjoyed spending time with her. She was outdoorsy and invited me there to go swimming that day, so off we went. Everything was fine and dandy, a quiet day. The water was dirty, but felt like a good rest bit from the heat. It was just the two of us there at the swimming pool. We were swimming around the spot on the opposite side of the lake, just the two of us, laughing, talking, etc. I'll never forget it, but all of a sudden, I had an incredible twisting feeling in my stomach, and my hearing and vision seemed to oddly sharpen immediately. I stood perfectly upright on my feet in the shallow water, doubled over and grasping my chest. Within 5 seconds of seeing this happen, Kay could tell something was wrong with me, and we both went completely silent and still as I looked at her, confused. In our brief silence, we could faintly hear 3 men talking nearby. We couldn't see anything as the swimming hole was around a bend, but we saw ripples in the water. A boat was approaching. My chest immediately relaxed. I quietly took in a deep breath and stared at Kay while we both stopped swimming to listen closely. Then, clear as day, we both heard them claim which one of us they each intended to keep once they caught us. She's blonde and I'm brunette, while another told them to be quiet. The water carried their voices and they didn't realize it. We heard their plans for brutality. Kay and I had direct eye contact during this 15-second or so experience, at which point she put her finger up to say SH and pointed frantically at the side of the cliff to climb back up. I've never moved so quietly and quickly in my life. Within 30 seconds, we had climbed our way back to the top of the cliff. The moment we hit the top, we saw a boat come around the bend looking for us. I don't know what or who she saw, but she gave me another SH. We walked away quickly from our shoes and picnic lunch and left them there among the trees within 30 seconds away from the shoreline. We fully bolted barefoot around the perimeter of the lake. Because the trail was within 30 ft of the lake all the way back to the wreck area, we could hear them start their engine and go around the water, yelling to each other, trying to figure out where we went. We were in flight mode, running straight for 10 minutes back to her car, darting on and off the trail to avoid being seen at the water line. We jumped into her car and whipped out of there as fast as possible. The parking lot was empty, but luckily they thought we were still at the swimming pool. We could see their boat whizzing around from the parking area as we sped away, shaking yet in tears. There was no one around us but us and them, and no cell service because it was secluded. The drive back to my house was only 20 minutes. The rest of the day was a blur, but I do remember her trying to explain something to a 911 operator once we had a signal again. The way her hand shook with her cell phone, dropping it more than once while on the line with operator and wiping blood off of my feet. This lake is still a popular spot for both locals and visitors. I want to preface this by saying the police are still looking into it, which is part of why I've been sitting on this for a while, but enough time has passed and I need to put it somewhere. So here it is. This was last February. I was driving back to school after visiting home for the weekend, a trip I'd made probably 30 times by that point, 4 hours across central Ohio on a mix of state routes and county roads. I knew the drive well enough that I usually did it half on autopilot, but I had left later than I should have, and about 2 hours in, the weather turned bad. Not just heavy snow, but a full white up. The kind where your headlights just bounce back at you off a white wall and you're essentially driving blind. I slowed to almost nothing, had my hazards on and was leaning forward over the wheel like that was going to help. I should have pulled over and waited it out. I know that. Instead, I crept along until the road curved. And I did it, and the passenger side tires dropped off the shoulder and the whole car tilted and slid nose first into a ditch. Not fast, not really violent, just a slow, helpless slide. And then I was stuck at an angle with snow up against the passenger window. No signal, completely dark outside in every direction except for one. About a 4-mile back down the road, there was a farmhouse set back from the road with 2 lit windows on the ground floor. I hadn't noticed it when I passed because I was focused on the road. I sat in the car for maybe 10 minutes, hoping another car would come by. None did, so I grabbed my jacket and walked. The property felt wrong before I even got to the door. I can't explain it better than that. The farm looked long abandoned from the outside. A collapsed out building off to the left, old equipment half buried in snow, a dead tree right at the edge of the porch that had been wrapped in some kind of rope or cord for no reason I could figure out. Wind chimes made of what looked like small bones hung above the front door. The animal kind, I assumed, but still. I knocked and told myself I was cold and tired and just reading into things. The man who answered was tall, maybe late 60s, with a wide, flat face and pale eyes that didn't quite track together when he looked at you. He smiled immediately, and the smile stayed on longer than smiles usually do after the initial greeting. I explained my situation. He nodded along slowly and then called back into the house without turning his head away from me, which I found strange. And a woman appeared from a doorway behind him. His wife, I assumed, small, gray-haired, wearing an apron over a house dressed like something out of a photograph from 60 years ago. She clasped her hands together when she saw me and said, "Oh, good," in a way that I've thought about a lot since. Not, "Oh, good, you're safe," or "Good coming out of the cold." Just, "Oh, good," like I was something expected. They brought me inside. The house was hot, not warm, like really hot. The kind of heat that hits you in the face and makes you slightly sick after being in the cold. Smelled like cooked meat and something under that I couldn't identify. Something older and heavier that the cooking smell was doing its best to cover. Every surface was cluttered. Stacks of old papers, jars of things along the window sills, crosses, and other symbols on the walls that weren't quite right. Slightly modified versions of things he'd recognized, wrong in small ways. There were no family photos. There were no personal touches of any kind that told you who these people were. The adult son was sitting at the kitchen table when they walked me in. He didn't stand or introduce himself. He was younger than them, maybe 40, Heavy said, and he watched me come through the doorway with an expression that wasn't hostile, but wasn't welcoming at all. Just watchful. He looked at me the way you look at something you're still deciding about. I told him I just need to wait out of the storm and would be out of their hair as soon as I could get a tow. The old man said, "Of course," and gestured to a chair at the kitchen table like it had been set out for me. Then the woman put a plate in front of me. I hadn't asked for food, hadn't mentioned to being hungry. She just set it down. I'm kind of stew thick and dark with meat and root vegetables and a heel of bread on the side. She stood back and folded her hands and looked at me. The old man sat across the table and the son hadn't moved. All three of them were looking at me. I said thank you and that I wasn't really hungry. The old man smiled and said I should eat, that it was cold and I needed something warm in me, that she'd made plenty. The woman just said nothing. She kept her hands folded and kept looking at the plate. The son looked at me now. There was something ceremonial about it. That's the only word I have for it. The way they positioned themselves, the way none of them spoke to each other, the total focus on whether I was going to eat. I felt very clearly that refusing was not going to go well, that the warmth in the room would curdle into something else. So I ate. I don't know how to describe the meat except to say it didn't taste like anything I could name. Not dry like deer or dark lamb. It was soft and it sat wrong with me immediately. Not in a spoiled food way, but in some deeper way I couldn't locate. Ate about half of it and said it was delicious and that I was full. And the old man nodded and sat back and something in the room relaxed slightly. The son went outside a while later and came back in and said he could pull my car out with the truck. I said, "Thank you," and stood up so fast I nearly knocked the chair back. The old man walked me to the door and shook my hand and held that it be too long and said to drive safe. The woman watched from the kitchen doorway. She was still smiling. The son pulled my car out without speaking a word to me and went back inside before I'd even started the engine. I drove 4 hours in the snow without stopping once, and I didn't fully breathe until I was inside my apartment with the door locked. About 6 weeks later, a friend sent me to a local news link. A sheriff's investigation had been opened on a property matching that rode an approximate location. The article was thin on details, said almost nothing. Just that investigators looking into the property in connection with a missing persons case out of a neighboring county. The article has since been updated twice, but still says very little. Active investigation, no arrests. I gave a statement. I've been told to accept a follow-up call. I haven't eaten stew since February. I probably won't for a long time. Some nights I wake up and I can still taste it, and I lie there in the dark trying to think about anything else until morning comes.